I'm talking about 6 activities that keep delegation from failing. There are some simple actions that you can start today to reduce delegation failure. The Authentic Leader Show is the podcast for technology and other industry leaders who are delegation masters and lead high-performing teams. Well, here we are talking about delegation again, and even delegation failure again, because it's so hard sometimes to get delegation right. And delegation is one skill that most managers and leaders that I work with, they struggle with the most. Most assume delegation success and are often confused when that delegation fails for them. Most managers and leaders, they are so busy that they don't make time to debrief and really understand what went wrong with their delegation. So they delegate again and wonder why delegation isn't more successful for them. Now, I shared the 10 reasons that delegation fails in episode 106. And it's about really a deeper underlying root causes of delegation failure. And I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode too. It's about 15 minutes long, but it's worth a listen if you are struggling with understanding why delegation fails. Today, however, is really a higher level understanding of some of the simple activities that you can do to make your delegation more successful and to reduce, if not even avoid, failure altogether. So listen to today's episode and then go back to listen to episode 106. And I think that you'll see a difference there. In July, I will be hosting a delegation workshop. And in that workshop, I'll be giving away all that you need to know to become a delegation master. If you'd like to learn more about this workshop, send me an email, private message me, or just leave a comment below and I'll get you all of the details. So it's a lot more than managers and leaders feeling frustrated by their delegation failures. It's also the teams of the managers and leaders who are also suffering. The team members want to do a good job and meet the expectations of the delegated work, but they're also wondering why they failed to meet expectations and when they actually fall short. If you've not spent time debriefing your delegation failures, today I'm going to do that for you. Consider a recent delegation that could have or maybe should have been more successful as I review these top reasons that delegation fails and the activities that you can actually do to reduce those delegation failures. The first one I'm going to talk about is establish a deadline. It's one of the top reasons delegation fails. As you can imagine, think about anything you delegate or anything that's been delegated to you. How often have you identified and agreed upon the deadline when the work is going to get done? There's a lot of assumption that happens here. So you simply need to do that, because if you don't, how will you hold someone accountable without a deadline? Without a deadline, you can't go back and say, I thought it was going to be done. Well, why did you think that? It was just in your head, unless you both have agreed on when that deadline is going to be. You and the person doing the work, you just both must be crystal clear when this work is going to be done and when will it be done. And one of the things I suggest doing when delegating work to someone else is to ask them for the deadline. Don't assign a deadline. You may have a deadline in your mind when you think the work needs to be done. And if when they think they can get it done and when you need it done are different, well, then you have some dialogue and you have some negotiation to talk about, well, why is that? And you may have to accept it, so on and so forth. Actually, I'll have a whole thing I talk about in that. But additionally to asking for a deadline and establishing a deadline, make sure you also follow up. If there is a deadline, follow up at that deadline. And speaking of follow up, you may want to follow up periodically while the work is getting done, depending on how long it takes to do the delegated work. But also agree on that. You may say, hey, do you mind if I check in with you on Tuesday just to see how things are going? So the first one here is just establish a deadline and the things that go into establishing a deadline. The second activity you can do to help to reduce your failures is to explain why. Don't assume that the person who's doing the delegated work understands why this work is getting done. It's up to you to explain the why. Without understanding why, that contributes to misaligned priorities, missed deadlines, missing the standards of work, all those things that go into it. It may be part of a process down the line. You may want to explain to them that there's another department or another coworker who can't do their part of the job until this part is done. Don't assume that people know what happens later down the line. It may be that the reason why you're asking them to do the work is that they're the most skilled person to do it. Or there's no one else right now who has the capacity to do this delegated work. There's hundreds of other reasons why, but understand and know why. Why did you pick this person to do this delegated work? And just simply explain to them very briefly. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but just explain, here's why I think you're the best person to do the job. So that's number two reasons or activities you can do to help to reduce your failures in delegation. Number three is be strategic. Here's an activity you can do to reduce your failures. Just be strategic and make sure you're connecting and explaining why you're delegating to work in the planning stages of delegation. So being strategic is just taking some time to think about and plan your delegated work. And a key benefit of delegation is that it is a strategic tool for managers and leaders to help their team to grow and to help set them up for success, to acquire new skills. It's one of the most effective ways for people to learn is to delegate work to them and give them some experiences that they wouldn't have otherwise if you weren't delegating this work. Maybe even set them up for a future career goal that they have. Take just a few minutes before delegating any task and just consider strategically why you're delegating the task to the person on the team. In your one-on-one meetings when discussing career aspirations, you may decide to delegate work simply to give them that experience to your team member, just so that they can learn that new skill. Delegation can and should be a tool that you use in career development for your team. You may not always be able to delegate to provide experience, but it's worth pausing just for a moment and considering when this work needs to get done and if someone on your team might need some experience, and you can strategically delegate that way. So just be strategic is one activity that you can do to reduce your delegation failure. Number four I'll list here is make sure that you're giving the appropriate authority. When we're talking about here is who is doing the work, and do they have the authority or the accountability to do the work? Now, accountability is another word for responsibility for the work being done. And it's important to understand the difference when delegating work. Confusing these two contributes to delegation failure, absolutely, when managers and leaders are just not clear, am I delegating authority or is it accountability? And I explain this, I go into full detail on this specific one topic in episode 105 of the Authentic Leader podcast. In summary, if you want to get the quick and dirty of it, in summary, the person doing the work needs the appropriate authority to make the decisions necessary as they're doing the work. Appropriate authority is not the same for everyone on the team. So you may need to make sure that you are clear what their decision-making authority is and what is appropriate for them. You may actually need to retain some level of decision-making authority as the delegation work is being done, depending on their experience, depending on the past work that they've done. If they've earned it and they know what they're doing, obviously they have probably earned the right to maybe make some more decisions as they're doing the work. But if they're brand new and never done it before, they may need to check in with you from time to time. And you may not want them to make those decisions without checking in with you and making sure that you agree with the decision or to help them make that decision. So as the person doing the work, you just simply still remain accountable for the work or responsible for the work. You're just making sure that you're giving some level of authority for decision making when the work is beginning done. So that's number 4 about an activity you can do to help reduce your delegation failure. Number 5 is an often forgotten activity in delegation, but it's simply accepting the work. People don't think about when they're delegating work that I need to acknowledge and accept the work. And this is simply when the work is completed, acknowledge that the work is complete. Take just a few minutes. Let the other person know, the person who did the delegated work, let them know that you acknowledge that the work has been completed and that you've received it. I can't tell you really, how often I hear stories of completed work, and the person who's doing the work, they don't know if the person who delegated the work to them even knows that the work is complete. This is important. It's worth taking just a few minutes to acknowledge that. Show appreciation if the work is turned in early, which actually brings me to the next activity on our list. So, going back, number 5 activity that you can do to reduce delegation failure is to accept the work. Take just a moment to acknowledge and accept the work. But leading into our next activity is number 6 is, of course, to give feedback. A lot of managers and leaders don't like to give feedback because they're uncomfortable with it. I actually have an entire workshop on giving and receiving feedback. As a matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, I gave an entire workshop to one of my largest clients. It was a lot of fun. We got a lot of interaction. We talked about actually a lot of real world examples and frustrations and struggles they were having in giving feedback, and give them some really great tools and even some practice about how to give feedback, give it in a way that it can be accepted and received and take action, of course, but also how to receive feedback. You need to demonstrate that as a leader. This is how you receive feedback in a way that people want to give you feedback. Because if you're in a position where you're not receiving feedback well, people don't want to give you feedback. So that's another tangent. But anyway, I have an entire workshop on that. But number 6 is to give feedback. And a quick crash course on feedback is to provide positive feedback first. Let the person know the work that they did, how it was good. In other words, what is it that they should continue doing for next time that they do this work? Just give us some more details, or details. I didn't ask you to do this, but you did that, and that is actually really good. So anything you can add that is positive feedback, it kind of sets the tone for the conversation to be able to give that positive feedback first. So then, if necessary, sometimes it's not necessary if the work has been done completely and done to your satisfaction, but if necessary, provide that constructive feedback. And it's important to address the root cause of why the work wasn't better than it should have been. It may be that you were unclear in your communication, or that you were unclear about the instructions, and maybe you didn't ask them for clarity that they fully understood. Or it may be that a part of the work was assumed, or a skill necessary for the work wasn't a skill that that person had. So it's worth talking about that and confirming what's the real root cause for giving this constructive feedback to someone. It may be that there's all sorts of other reasons, of course, that delegation fails. It's all the reasons, right? But get to the root cause of it. Key here is to address the root cause and not to attack the person who's doing the work. Most people come to work to do a good job, and I recommend and I highly suggest to managers they go into it thinking that. Assume honorable intentions. They're doing a good job. But as the manager and the team leader, your job is to set your team up for success. And giving effective, constructive feedback gets to that important and improved delegation for next time. So understand why delegation fails. It's a first step to delegation success. There are 2 ways to know if these 6 activities that keep delegation from failing. Here's why I know these things. I learned from all of my mistakes. I didn't do these activities, especially when I was first promoted to a manager role. And I learned the hard way. I learned by trial and error, and I learned the right way to delegate as a result. And number 2 reason why I'm able to talk about how to delegate and how to avoid these failures is that I've validated these 6 activities with the leader clients that I work with. These are the activities that are keeping leaders every day from being more effective as delegators. And now I help leaders to keep their delegation efforts from failing as well. So my challenge to you is, which of these activities are causing your delegation to be less successful than they could be? What other reasons have you found that delegation fails? I encourage you to not apply all of these 6 activities. We just went through a lot of 6 activities. They're all very important. I'm not saying one's more important than the other, but rather my challenge to you is to pick one of these 6 activities and begin doing that one activity, and then identify the results that you get. See if it helps you. See if it helps to improve your delegation. and a really good get really good at that one delegation activity, and only then try another one. Just try one at a time for a period of time until you feel like you've somewhat mastered it. So I'm not saying that you aren't capable of applying all 6 of these, but the one thing for sure that I can tell you is that I have learned from coaching hundreds of leaders is that don't bite off more than you can chew, because when you do that, you end up doing nothing. Making a small commitment to one activity and then follow through on that commitment. I found that if you try to do everything at once, you're most likely to end up doing, well, it's nothing all at once, right? Well, I would love to talk to you about your delegation strategy. You can schedule a free strategy call by going to ChristopherRJones.com. If you can relate to anything that I've shared here today, or if you have any questions, put a comment here and I will respond. You can also DM me or reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile. As I mentioned earlier, in July, I will be hosting a delegation workshop. I'll be giving away all that you need to know to become a delegation master. If you'd like to learn more about this workshop, send me an email, private message me, or leave me a comment below, and I'll get you all of the details. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me at I am Christopher Jones. You can find more information and get other free resources when you go to ChristopherRJones.com. Hey, thank you for joining us today. Please come back next week for another podcast episode.